events. This is our first major public event that we're having at Grand Street Guild, which is sort of becoming a sort of a home base for mesh operations. It is very cool. You know, I came in during the pandemic, you know, some time ago when, you know, they were still sort of floating around, and sort of mesh inventory and equipment has sort of lived out of most people's closets and basements, and at least my garage. So it is very cool that not only we're returning back to normalcy of being in person, having in-person meetings to talk about the future of the organization, both in terms of connecting with people like you all, but also operationally and having our mesh centraled here. So thank you all so much. I just want to do a quick intro just to see, it'd be cool to, if everyone could just, since we don't have a huge crowd, we'll try to keep it quick though. If everyone could say their name, what neighborhood they're coming from, and what they think the mesh is.
I'm Jason, I'm from Brooklyn. What do I think the mesh is? Community connecting.
Hey, I'm Joseph. I'm a volunteer with with the Seattle MeshNet project. So I have a lot of experience with them, but I'm new here. I did install number 5420 in Brooklyn, but I moved to Manhattan, so hopefully North Manhattan's next. What's the mesh? It's a community-owned data network. Let's just go with that.
I'm Alex. I live in Park Slope, and I think the mesh is a good model for the future.
My name is Alex, and I think that the mesh is like a peer-to-peer network of something like that. I don't know.
Hi, I am Paul. I'm from the Bronx, and I think the mesh is a good idea. It's a long overdue idea.
Hey, I'm Edward from Park Slope, and here to learn about the mesh, but I guess it connects everyone to the internasty.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I think the mesh is the best chance we have to sort of take some power back from the internet service providers.
I'm John, coming from Crown Heights. I see mesh as a co-op internet service provider.
Hi, I'm Larry. I live just up the road on East Houston there, and I think the mesh is the future.
Peter, I'm from Brooklyn. I think that mesh, it's a great playground when you can play with technology and make everything work.
I'm Zach. I used to be from Midtown, but now I'm in Westchester, so I'm one of those people who left. But anyway, what is the mesh? I think the mesh is a really nice a community network where we can learn about technology and try new things while also helping people at the same time. And would you like to say
Name what neighborhood you're coming from and what is the mesh?
So yeah, my name is Alex. I live in Bed-Stuy, newish to New York City, and super pumped about mesh. I guess what is the mesh is, I don't know, is it one of the philosophical questions, or like to me, or yeah, so to me, I love it because established ISPs have no incentive to do anything, and so a bottom-up approach is how it should work, and it's awesome. Yeah, so like any really cool person, I talk about it to all my coworkers and stuff, and I'm sure they love hearing about it still. But yeah, so yeah, just pretty pumped to be here, and that's it.
Thank you so much for your answers and your honesty. Again, there are no wrong answers except for the wrong ones. I'm gonna ask Brian.
I'm Brian. I live in the East Village, and I'm doing a presentation later which will explain what I think the mesh is.
Great. So as I alluded to before, you know, we're here at this operations central that's sort of becoming like this. You know, of course, a lot of the literature on our website describes that, you know, mesh is very decentralized, and we should not want to put all our eggs in one basket when it comes to both operations, community, or location. But Grand Street Guild is very important to us, as I will talk about in a later presentation as well. But I also want to let you know, like, this is what the space is, and, you know, we are sort of in the space because we have seen it as a great way to expand and scale up as the network grows to more and more people and more parts of New York. To explain a bit how Grand Street and how fiber optics future sort of plays into our plan to expand to other parts of New York, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Zach, who will talk about our new supernode in the west side of Manhattan.
Cool. Thank you very much. Do I just push next here? And Jelly, can you see the slides, or do you have it wired up that way?
I can't see the slides.
Oh.
It helps me if you stand in one spot.
Okay, sure. No problem. Okay, anyway, yeah, so I'm Zach. I've been working with the mesh for, I don't know, about 6 years or so. And one of the things that I do is work on the supernodes, among other things. But the supernodes, well, before I get to the next part of it, just as a background for the presentation, the supernodes are basically how we get internet from donated internet connections. We have firewalls and routers and so forth that take that and give it to the antennas, so then downstream nodes can use it, right? So it's a critical part of the mesh because it enables us to do everything else that happens in the mesh. And providing and having them and doing a good job will speak to sort of the thing that Daniel was talking about having diversity and not depending on any one location, any one provider, and so forth. So I'm going to talk about a new one. We're calling it Supernode 10. You can call it a point of presence. You can use whatever fancy word you like. It's 111 8th Avenue. So just as one more background before going into this, these presentations are a bit backwards because, which is okay, because this location is what connects, this 111 8th Avenue is what connects this building that you're in now. And so keep that in mind when we hear the next presentation about the size and shape of this building that we're in now. Okay, so 111 what? What does that mean? Why should you ever know this address, and why is it something that like sounds interesting, right? It's a building on 15th and 8th. It's a full city block. It's just shy of 3 million square feet, so it's huge. And it's bigger than the Empire State Building on its side. It has a rooftop helipad. Who cares, right? It has a truck-size freight elevators. It has like 14 of them, and it has 182 internet carriers in it. So it's one of the most connected buildings in Manhattan. Most of internet traffic goes through there somehow eventually. In 2010, Google bought the building for about $2 billion because it's such an important internet hub that they wanted to own it and be part of it. They also happen to have a lot of offices there, so this just shows the magnitude of how critical it is. Moreover, here's a quote from Wikipedia. During the Northeast blackout of 2003, the building was able to keep power on because it has 37 generators, right? It's a crazy infrastructure building that we are now part of as well. It's a giant data center. That's what it is, that all this nonsense is trying to tell you. It looks like that. Not really, but it actually does look like that is. That is a picture from that building from some time ago. It also does look like this on the ceilings. There are wires all over the building. These are not from me. They're from the Wired magazine credits. So yes, why did we choose this location? Well, we have a matrix here of, we made this some time ago, of just different locations that are in, I guess it's off a little bit. It's where the Y's are just below it, so my apologies. But these are different data centers, and these are different people that we want to connect with, or people who have offered to give us internet connectivity for the community. And so by choosing one of the buildings that is maybe expensive, but allows us to connect to everybody we want to, it really can make it so that we can consume all of the bandwidth that's possible to be donated to us. So it's an important location, and as New Yorkers, we know location, 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 right? This is an important thing. That's why some of us get apartments that are too expensive in the right neighborhood, because you want to go to the coffee shop that you want down the street, right? And so this is sort of the same thing, but with the internet carrier version of that. It allows us to grow in the future. So up until this point, for better or worse, maybe it's embarrassing for us to say, we haven't had a lot of redundancy in our network. Yes, it's a mesh. It fails over between different antennas and different nodes. It's very redundant in that aspect. But once you get to the internet portion of it, you either go out through Manhattan or you go out through Brooklyn. And if one of them goes down, you have to reroute across the whole mesh, go the other way, and then go back out. You can't really jump between them. We also don't really have more than one connection at either location. And so it's not a great situation. We need to solve this somehow. Moreover, with the way that we have it set up now, even if we were able to go between those two sites directly with a fiber or something, it's not really very easy to share the bandwidth. So for example, on the left here, you see we have supernode 1 with 1 gigabit of internet. And on the right, we have supernode 3 with 40 gigabits. Well, for some time, we actually had more bandwidth going out of supernode 1 than supernode 3, just because the balance of who was on which side was more shifted towards the Manhattan side. It's a little bit different now, but we can't really share the bandwidth very well across these two sites. So goals that we should look for in the future, and that's why we're doing this site, is we want to get more upstream bandwidth from donors who want to donate it to us. We also want to use that bandwidth better, because if we get it and we don't use it well, there's no point in having it. It doesn't help anybody in the mesh. And using it better means smoother for members, better failover and redundancy when there are problems on the internet or when we have problems, better access to internet resources. You know, you take the shortest path to Netflix that you can rather than having to go through a complicated path, because that's what's available in your neighborhood. And we also want to be able to hook up fiber connections like this location without having to redo the entire world every time we want to connect something. Okay? So we've created, or we are creating, the NYC Mesh Backbone Network, which is just another portion of the mesh, but it's mostly going to be fiber. Why? Because of the reasons I just mentioned, but more specifically, most of the buildings that have antennas or where we can get internet don't have antennas, or they aren't really good antenna locations for the mesh in general. There's only a handful of these data centers that really would serve us appropriately. And so bringing internet to the people purely with antennas on data centers doesn't scale very well. And it's not going to let us do a good job to help the members. So we essentially need to create our own internet, our own section of the internet, in order to serve ourselves, which is the members, right? So that's kind of what we're doing. This diagram is kind of an interesting thing I threw together today. On the left and right, we have a bad antenna location versus a good antenna location. And on the up and down axis, the vertical axis, we have good connectivity versus bad connectivity. And so you can see that locations like Grand Street, Rivington, PH, Morrisania, they're all really good antenna locations. They're super tall, and they're really nice locations for us. They serve a lot of people in neighborhoods that we haven't served before, but they have poor connectivity. And if you look at some of our existing supernodes, supernode 1, 375 Pearl, and number 3, they're good antenna locations, sort of, but they have okay connectivity. And then you look at like 111 8th Avenue, it has the best connectivity, but it's a horrible antenna location. And so what we need to do is we need to merge the really great connectivity locations with the really great antenna locations. And so the way to do that is to have, for example, fiber optics between those sites, build our own backbone, and connect them together, right? So that's the premise of the whole thing. It's kind of a standard practice to do that. So we'll just move on. So we're going to move from this, where we have kind of independent sites that are connected through the mesh, to something more like this, where we have multiple locations. We can take multiple upstream internets, and we can connect them all to different neighborhoods, either one-off or redundant, and then have all the mesh behind it. And so you can see there's a lot of ways that we can make it more redundant. This is the ultimate goal, and we have portions of this already up and running. All right? So what we have at this building is the epitome of this concept that we're doing. So at 111 8th Avenue, we have half a rack, which is twice our supernode 1 space. We have 40 amps of power, which is 2.5 times the supernode 1 space. So it's really boosting us up quite a bit. We have a bunch of cross connects to the Meet Me room, which is way more than we can ask for at somewhere else. We now have 40 gigabits of internet. So as much as in SN3, we have that all again. So now we have 81 gigabits of internet for the mesh recently. We've just been offered a 10 gig internet exchange connection, so that's 10x what we were offered 5 years ago. And we have a bunch of Juniper switches from an anonymous donor. And of course, dark fiber to this location, and more to come. The benefits over supernode 1, it's bigger, it's better. We're not stuck with just one connection. We have access to the Meet Me room and so forth. It's also been a big challenge to get more than 1 gigabit out of supernode 1 for a number of reasons. From supernode 3, even though we have a lot of bandwidth there, there's no exchange. We're really going to be stuck on a number of very small connections that are kind of difficult to consume. So Brooklyn is not really going to probably get much more bandwidth, which is unfortunate, even though it is a lot. And we also can't connect, being that it's in Brooklyn, it's good for fiber in Brooklyn, but it's not going to get us into the Bronx. It's not going to get us into Harlem or anywhere else. So we have to have something in Manhattan, and Brooklyn can be the other access point. Okay. Anyway, this makes it future-proof. It's safe because we can switch to different location within the same building. It's big enough. We can have multiple providers duke it out about which one wants to give us the right price fiber, right, which is nice. It's cost reducing because we don't have to have a new connection for every building we want to connect. We can have them all centralized in one location, okay? Yes, so what does it look like? So we're in this location right here where you can see, I mean, this is the actual picture where we are, not from some Wired magazine. So we're in this location here on the left-hand side. There's tons of fiber going overhead. We have this space right here. And yes, it's a really good building to be in. So far, from starting around in December up to February, there was a phase where they were building out the cabinet for us. We got dark fiber here in April. In May, we got 40 gigabits of internet from a donor pilot. As of June, this month, we have a 20 gigabit router deployed. Well, 20 is less than 40, yes, but we're working up to it, right? We're not going to consume it all in one day. We have, although it only has a 3 gigabit capability, so it's unfortunate we're a little bit bottlenecked, but we will be working on that. And in June, also this month, we switched Grand Street over to using this connection from this location to there. So all of the traffic in this area is being served via the dark fiber to 111 8th Avenue. In July, I'm hoping that we can get we can actually start exiting traffic locally to the internet from our new POP. We'll have 40 gigabit router sometime next month. I hope in the coming months we'll have a 10 gig internet exchange connection, so it'll be really redundant and looking in the positive direction there, as well as moving our DKIX connection over and increasing the bandwidth as well. So that's all. I'm happy to take questions, and we can also talk more in the technical breakout about the specifics about why different locations might be hard or so forth. Any question? Yes, Daniel.
So at the data center, when it comes to, let's say, we are able to, once we have that link, in the route, how easy it is to say upgrade in cases, let's say, Internet 2.0 requires terabits of speed. What is the investment needed to connect to both our peers and the donated bandwidth? And what needs to happen on both sides to take advantage of more bandwidth increases in the future?
Yeah, so, whoa, this is a good mic. All of the connections we have in our rack are dark fiber. So to the providers, it's all dark fiber. From there to here is dark fiber. We can put whatever signal we want on top of it. So to Pilot, for example, we have a fiber over to Pilot's rack, and in it we put 40 gigabit Ethernet, right? So in that we could, if we wanted to switch to 100, we would just agree with them, and they would have to want it, right? They would have to say, yes, we're willing to have you do that. We would switch out the optic cables, or not the fiber optic transceivers, the GBICs. We would switch them to 100 gigabit, and we would be good, right? So the limitation on bandwidth from the donating side and the transport side is really what the provider is willing to give us and how much we're willing to spend on equipment, right? So if we wanted to have 200 gigabit, 400, 800 to this location, it's super easy. It just costs money, right? So it's really just a cost problem at that point. Jason, yeah, I think Daniel had. Did that answer your question, Daniel? Yes. Okay.
Are there any plans that you're aware of anyone running fiber between Manhattan and Brooklyn through the tunnel, the Q-Carry tunnel, or any other projects?
So we would never run fiber ourselves through those tunnels, right? Some provider would do it. It's notoriously difficult to get fiber between those locations, between Manhattan and Brooklyn. There is fiber, of course, right? But it's super expensive because there's limited conduit space in the tunnels. The tunnels are old. You can't stop traffic all the time to put new conduit, right? So for the same distance within Manhattan or within Brooklyn versus going across the bridge is 4 or 5 times more expensive. So it would not make any sense to say, if you had a building in the Lower East Side, to serve it from Brooklyn. Because even if you just built a POP in Manhattan and lit dark fiber, it would be half the cost of running across the bridge one time, right? So for us, I don't know that we would ever deploy a fiber across the bridge. We might buy a leased line circuit. We might buy a dark fiber. We might buy a channel, something. I think, yeah, we would have, I hope, fiber between Manhattan and Brooklyn at some point, maybe in the form of an Ethernet connection from a third-party provider. Maybe not a dark fiber, because it's getting into $6,000, $7,000 a month for that. It's kind of stupid, right, at that point. It wouldn't be worth it to us. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think there was a question in the back. Did you have one? No? Okay. Anyone else? Yes, over here. Here.
Yeah, I think my question is probably a little bit more basic, just because I've never attended. I'm not too familiar with the mesh, but so I guess I'm sort of still trying to figure out exactly like what it does, like on a high level. Like it sounds like it's some kind of like IP addressable subnet that where you maintain all the lower layers yourself through donations or something, or
are you talking about the mesh or supernodes?
Yeah, the mesh. Yeah.
So the mesh, maybe we should in the introduction. The mesh is a community network, so it's a computer network. It's just a network, and it's fully routed. So every node independently has its own IP addresses, and it sees its neighbors and it builds a routing table. So it's just pretty much basic computer networking at that point. And if people don't understand that, that's fine. We can talk more about that. But the core concept is it's just computer networking. It's just basic routing, right? A supernode is one of those locations, which it's kind of like if you have a home router, except it's 1,000 times larger, more powerful, and we take in a giant internet connection, and it helps transform that. So we're basically just building a big citywide community-owned network, and this is one of those.
Okay, so the idea of the mesh is really it's more about like a difference in the way that the network is owned.
Yeah, difference in the way it's owned and built out. We're not using, with the exception of some buildings, we're not using third-party people to go and do it. It's not something. There's no top-level bosses that say that you can't use it. There's no service plan. It's an open donation-based network, and it's public access. You can get it in your home, and you can donate what you think is appropriate: $10, $20, $50 a month. You don't have to stop it. You can start it again anytime you want. It's all donation-based. So it's a donation-based community internet network. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure if I said it well enough or not. Yeah.
So I understand difficulty between the city and the Brooklyn running the fiber.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering if it makes sense to run fiber in the Brooklyn between SN3 to other hubs like PH, Vermont. Would that make sense financially and beneficial for mesh itself?
Yeah, it sure could make sense. I don't know that we want to do all the sites, but we'd have to figure out whether that makes sense or not. But let's say we run fiber to Vernon, right? That would definitely want to come from Supernode 3. And Supernode 3, there is fiber there. We have internet. It's an okay location. There's no problem. The comments about it not being a good location in this is related to the additional connectivity we can get from the outside. Right, but in terms of fiber, there's a lot of fiber landing there, and yeah, we could, if you're in Brooklyn, run fiber from Supernode 3, and it wouldn't be too expensive. Now in Manhattan, even though Manhattan's a more expensive borough than Brooklyn in general across the board for everything, right? There is a lot of conduit in the ground already. There's pipes in the ground, so it's not that bad to run fiber around Manhattan. For example, this building, it didn't really cost us any capital in order to dig the ground up to run fiber into this building. So that's pretty cool. In Brooklyn, you kind of have to do that. You have to dig up the streets for 2 or 3 blocks because the main roads are farther apart and so on. So it might be more expensive in that aspect, but we wouldn't go across bridge. You would go from Supernode 3, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think there's a question right here, if you want to pass the mic.
Yeah, so I keep hearing you use the word run fiber, right? Are we, are we out there pulling wires through conduits, right? Like, or is this more of sort of we have vendors and we're renting service and existing dark fiber lines?
So I wish we were out there pulling fiber. I think that'd be really great for us to do. No, generally you have to be on a special list of the city that lets you open the manholes and pull fiber. So we're not doing it ourselves, but we're also not using someone's internet connection. There are dark fiber providers, so people who just lease the fiber optics themselves in the ground. And for example, they usually have large trunks of fiber that is running around the city. So for here, for example, they pulled the vendor, Crown Castle, pulled a fiber through an existing conduit from this building over to a manhole just outside the street, and then they spliced it onto a fiber that goes that direction. And they spliced it several more times to get to this building, one of the.
So they physically laid that infrastructure just for us at our expense.
Well, this portion they laid just for us, but the next portion they're on some trunk cable that has 1,000 lines, and they just took 2 of them off of there and spliced it onto us.
Sure.
So there's hundreds of other uses of those lines that is not related to us.
Sure.
Yeah, they didn't pull that fiber. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Just answered, actually.
Yeah, okay, great. Anyone else? Oh, in the back there.
So like with our point-to-point networks, it seems like we have more control of them maybe because we don't lease anything. Is there any risk of the fiber at some point getting like taken over by Verizon or some other competing actual ISP?
I see. Yeah, so you can think of the fiber as a point-to-point network as well. It's just in the ground. And the companies that we're leasing from, for example, Crown Castle, they lease to T-Mobile, Verizon, a bunch of other companies, right? So it's not really something that Verizon can take over, right? It's a different sort of thing. It's a commercial lease for an asset, and a bunch of really large companies, any Fortune 500 company uses this sort of thing, right? So it's not something that would be really different from what corporations would do, right? So there's not really an aspect of that, but also we have a lease. So a big difference between this and a point-to-point network, a point-to-point antenna network, is there's interference in the point-to-point antenna. One side or both sides might be on a guerrilla installation where people said, yeah, go ahead and do it, but someday the landlord could complain and they could take it down, right? Whereas this is a lease that's on a contract, and if they have to fulfill it, and we have to fulfill it. So we have to pay them from the community money, and they have to give it to us, or we can sue them, right? And there's options to renew and things like that. So it's almost a stronger guarantee in that it has to work, and if it doesn't work, even if it goes down for a couple hours, like if the fiber gets cut for a couple hours, we can call them and say, hey, you have to fix it, and if you don't, you pay us back 1% every minute for it being down. Like, they have to pay us back as an SLA, right? Potentially someone could take it over, but I think that would be really challenging. These are billion-dollar infrastructure companies that hold fiber optics across the whole country. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, one in the front here. Here, I'll bring it out. The light is very bright.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that kind of brings up the question I was going to ask. Does this change anything for NYC Mesh and their strategy with funding? Is this going to be something, if we're going to do another installation like this, is this going to affect funding? Are we going to seek grants more or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I'll talk in general, and then I'll speak about this location specifically. So in general, we have been trying to be, and I think we were successful at being very responsible with the money that we're getting in. So we're not spending more than comes in on monthly donations, by and large. In the past, maybe a few times we did more than we should because it needed it, right? But these days we're not spending more that's coming in. And so we wouldn't sign a new lease for some location unless the funds were available to do that, right? So that would be irresponsible of us to do for you guys, the community, right? So in that aspect, I don't think it changes the funding, because there should already be a bit of surplus that is available to buy antennas and things like that, and we would stop buying antennas and do a lease instead. for that area. That said, this location has been very generous. We have an agreement with them to help do all the apartment buildings, and the buildings themselves, I mean, there's sort of I don't know which aspect of it is, but they're paying to do the build out, which is really nice. So they paid for all the infrastructure in the buildings themselves as an improvement to the buildings, all the wiring to all the apartments. And they're also paying a stipend every month for the connection itself. So, and there's more nuance to it, but they're being very generous here and covering the costs for it. So this one actually, even though it's an amazing opportunity for us, it's pretty much net zero in terms of cost. It didn't take from our community money all that much. Just one other aspect is that because, just going back a little bit, in this picture right here, we see that there's only 2 supernodes here, and yet we have a whole bunch of different locations, theoretical locations that could have fiber run to them. And if we stay with our previous model, we would have to either have a new internet connection at every location, or we would have to have a new supernode, and then have, so it would start to get really expensive. Whereas if we do it this way, the cost really is just the fiber, not the fiber plus a bunch of infrastructure, plus another internet connection, plus more routers, plus another lease, right? So if you have a couple sites, maybe 3, 4, 5 fiber connected sites, it really starts to go down, the central costs start to go down quite a bit, and it becomes much less of a burden and actually beneficial on the funding side. Yeah, the economy of scale for fiber connections. Yeah, does that help?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. There's one behind you, question.
Yeah.
Oh, guys first.
Yeah. So are we looking to move our existing P2P radio connections, antenna connections, to fiber? Are we looking to replace member connections?
No, I mean, we have hundreds of antennas all around. We're definitely not going to run fiber to hundreds of buildings. It's only the fiber is supposed to be to maybe major hubs like here, called a supernode, whatever the delegation is, right? Yeah, so the idea is from backbone nodes, if possible, run to some hubs that kind of inject a giant bandwidth into a neighborhood.
Like Saratoga.
Like Saratoga or Vernon or here. But for example, if we get 10 gigabit from here to Vernon, it would not help that much to have fiber to Vernon, right? So maybe it'd be better to run fiber to somewhere farther out where it's really challenging to get a radio to, right? So for here, it'd be really challenging to get any radio connection to any site that has enough bandwidth for us, including Supernode 1, right? So it's a really good thing to run fiber to here. This can supply this entire portion of the city, right? Yeah, but we can run fiber to a lot of places, but definitely the P2Ps are not going away. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, connection, or there's a question behind you.
Yeah, maybe this is a better question for Brian, but the mesh's strategy going forward. It sounds like this is a great new tool for our arsenal. Is the mesh still primarily going to be wireless strategy focused for new connectivity going forward? And what is our last mile fiber strategy, right? Like we're doing it in this building here, but then, and it seems primarily for sort of this backhaul interconnectivity, what is the, do we plan to be going out and adding 10 more apartment buildings next year kind of a thing? Like what's the long-term vision there?
Yeah, I think we can definitely, we're not partial to one technology or another, I think. A lot of meshes, especially some European meshes, will say, we're a wireless mesh network. And so we're using wireless technology because it's easy to do and it makes sense and you can get around, you don't have to buy anything, and there's a lot of positives to it. But it doesn't mean that wireless is awesome, right? I mean, fiber has a lot of bandwidth, more than you can get on wireless, right? So if fiber is the right thing to do, great. If wireless is the right thing to do, great. In fact, there's one location we're thinking of that's going to have wireless to the rooftop and then fiber inside, right? And so it's not because we think fiber is great, it's just that's a really easy way to run cables inside to people's apartments, right? So use whatever technology works, yeah. And I think Brian will tell you later that he really wants whole building installations, and so fiber is a good way to help that, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Okay. Oh, Jolly has a question. Yes, Jolly. Yes, you have to use a mic, Jolly.
Oh, yeah. Are you using CBRS at all?
We're not. No. Yeah. I mean, so for those who want to know, CBRS is the Citizen Band Radio Service. I think maybe that's the right. Spectrum. Anyway, it's 3.5 gigahertz versus 2.5 versus 5 gigahertz, and it's a lightly licensed band, which is starting to be used by a lot of LTE providers and other kind of point-to-point networks. So it's a good band. It's licensed. The equipment's expensive. I think we'd be open to using it, but we don't have a strong desire. That doesn't change the world, right, for us. Yeah. Cool. So, yep. Yep.
For the wireless communication, is there like a multiple access protocol that's being used? Okay.
Yeah. So we have two types of antennas, point-to-point antennas, which are usually high bandwidth. They can be 5 gigahertz, 24 gigahertz. We're going to get a 70 or 80 gigahertz very soon.
So and different frequency.
For the
frequency
point-to-point
division. Yeah. Okay.
And then for the multiple access, it works like Wi-Fi over the air, but it's still 5 gigahertz, so it's very similar to the AC Wi-Fi. But most of what we're using is Ubiquiti, AirMax, yes, thank you. I forgot the name for a second. AirMax, which is TDMA, so it has timing slots to increase the efficiency. But yes, it's multiple access. So most of it, if you look on our map, for those online as well, if you look on our map, you'll see lots of stars.
The wireless antennas are used for like last mile networking.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
And I don't know if that gentleman over there mentioned like peer to peer or something. Are the edge nodes communicating with each other over antennas?
Yes. Yeah, our network is fully routed, so it's kind of like like a college campus with 500 buildings.
Okay.
That one building talks to the next building, then this building talks to the next building. Whoever you can connect with, whoever is within your view, more or less, either over the air or over a point-to-point, over a point-to-multipoint, you peer with them and you route all of your traffic with them to the best path to the internet. Yeah. Yep. Cool. I think our next presentation is Daniel. All right, good. So thank you for this, for your questions, and we will have a tech breakout time and a social breakout time later, I believe. So we can continue to talk about it more. So thank you. Do you want this muted, Jolly, or no? Okay.
I sent a new presentation. I'm sorry. I know. I had a little time to work on it. The latest one, yeah, that one. Well, thank you, Zach, for that. I'm going to be talking a little bit more specifically about how we've alluded to specifically this building and how this plays into the fiber plans and how it plays into the rest of the network. Definitely a lot of people have asked, both on the Slack and a little bit of here, is what's happening with the rest of the wireless network. And don't worry, I'm going to answer that here. So don't worry, the wireless network isn't going away anytime soon. And so that's going to be very important for this. All right, so we're at Grand Street Guild. What is Grand Street Guild? It is basically an affordable housing project that we have partnered with back in 2019 to bring internet access to the residents of this building. So this is a pretty noble idea. Instead of we've sort of partnered with you might have seen on the Slack that we're partnering with NYCHA and we're partnering some with other private management companies to sort of put Wi-Fi access in buildings and courtyards. This is where that's originated from. This is the very first area where, hey, we can sort of provide a value add to residents in a building, in a large building like this. Back in 2019, we had started with the build out on the roof. Jason Howard here in the front is very familiar as he was part of that build out. So we were on the roof of this building, not this building, but the two taller ones, because as you can see, this one's a little recessed. So we're taking advantage of the two tall buildings out of the three. And we have antennas there beaming from all over the East Village down to Sabi, which is the Supernode 1 connection where the internet has been coming from for the longest time, as well as large parts of Williamsburg and Greenpoint across the river. So this has been a really instrumental part of getting a lot of our Manhattan and Brooklyn nodes connected, especially once our Vernon hub went up, which is a NYCHA development. So, you know, this is definitely, in terms of centrality to the current network as it stood, this is very much logically central. It is, if you look at a map, it's not necessarily the most central place. If you look at the most central place in our network, it's probably going to be somewhere in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. But in terms of like how many hops every person has to, wireless hops, every antenna has to get to, this is sort of in the central. This is pretty much everything is connected to everything, which is what makes it a really ideal to land fiber here. So in terms of what was our value add back then, so this partnership and the construction happened in 2019, I believe. So across here, we actually were putting Wi-Fi access points on the poles all around us. You know, the light poles, we're putting mesh, ubiquity mesh APs on each of those light poles, which all connect, and actually terminated right here in this very room. You can actually see the Ethernet cables running from behind Jolie, that coming from the window. If you see on the ground, you might see those two funky Ethernet cables. Well, that was holding up a lot of the wireless access points around here. And before fiber was even in the question, there was an antenna on this roof from a pole that looked something like that and pointed down to this location to get the internet down to the ground. So, you know, that's a great solution, but then the expansion was actually getting the residents connected. Now, in terms of getting the residents connected, the main goal for that is trying to, how do you get the fastest connection possible, but also taking up the smallest space. Most of the installer leaders, like I, had only been familiar with Ethernet at the time, which, you know, for most Ethernet, it's kind of thick. It's like a ½ inch. And if you want to shove, like for 24 floors, if you want to shove, you know, 24 cables down a really tiny pipe, you're going to have a bad time, as well as the need to carry power over that. The major difference between a fiber and Ethernet network in terms of a mass building deployment is that Ethernet, like copper, is going to need power at every splice. You know, there's no way to passively splice it. You have to have a switch. So that means you have to start tapping power on each floor. That means you got to get an electrician, and, you know, that gets a little funny. You know, in a lot of places it's possible that have, like, you know, pre-RAN Ethernets everywhere, but this building was constructed in the 1970s. There's no pre-RAN Ethernet, unfortunately. So we went with fiber. So just to tick off from where Zach left off in terms of where we're coming from the supernode, earlier this year, we were able to have our fiber provider, Crown Castle, to come in and fish the fiber down from the manhole outside on Broome Street into just a room down the hall from here, which is super awesome. Maybe we'll do a tour. I don't know. But basically, you can see on the top right, the construction crews from Crown Castle are actually fishing the fiber through to the manhole into that room and then running that big spool of super armored cable right here. Now, it's a really big armored cable that contains lots of fiber, but we're actually only using 2 strands. 2 strands of fiber, you know, unlike copper, can actually carry 100 gigabits if you put the right stuff at each end. We don't need that much right now, but that is the potential, and that is what Zach was explaining, that it really you know, the fiber does not need to be upgraded. All you need to do is change the optics at each end to take advantage of whatever new technologies is available. So that is you know, that really makes it easy to future-proof, and it makes the overhead of maintaining the fiber network really low. So that's some of my crummy handwriting describing, you know, what are we doing? How are we going to put this into our rack? You can see the evolution of that. Those crummy handwriting turned into putting our equipment on the wall. So we were able to now have our Crown Castle termination box on the left, we have our own fiber box on the right, and we get to put our own equipment on the wall. So if some of you have been install leaders or have been on an install with me or somebody else in the past, if you've been in the install team channel, you might have seen, like, okay, you have an Omnitic router and you have a light beam and you have, you know, they talk to each other. It's kind of like magic. In here, it's actually, it uses the same routing protocol as the rest of the network, OSPF. That means open shortest path first. Basically, there was some really cool mathematician in the 80s who decided to figure out, oh, you can use Dijkstra's algorithm to figure out, hey, if you have a certain amount of interconnected nodes or spots that are all connected with wires, how do you mathematically calculate how they're closest to each other? This is using the same stuff, roundabout a way of saying that, which means that we can just put in a router here that can connect to the rest of the network, to the wireless network, without having to change anything. And this means that this is going to help our wireless network in the long term. We'll get to that at the end. You can see here there's some fiber terminations here. This is the OLT. That's called optical line terminal, and that's where the fiber actually goes into and splits out. Again, as I'm saying, then one of the nice things about fiber is that it's a completely passive thing. That means you can split it, you can not combine it, but you can split it infinitely without needing to put power in certain spots. Sometimes you will need repeaters if you split it too many times, but the idea is if you plan out your fiber network well, we can get it into a numerous amount, 600 apartments with just those two little boxes, which is pretty nice. Instead of having to use, a switch, a Ethernet repeater, power on every single floor, there's 24 floors in each building, that would start to get really complicated really fast. So the benefit of a fiber network. So in terms of what we're doing here at Grand Street, this is the goal of this project is to bring, in terms of involvement of Grand Street, is to bring fiber to the home, fiber into the apartments, which is not something normally we do. Again, if you've been on install with us, you've seen that we normally bring Ethernet from the antennas into the apartment. From a standpoint, it's just easier to pull through the raceways and you don't need power. This is sort of a demonstration of how we actually work with it. So you can see Zach on the bottom left is in one of the trash chutes, that's like where the pipe goes from the basement of the building all the way to the roof. That is a place where we're tapping into that fiber and actually splitting it out into the apartments. That's a splitter. It comes from one fiber going down to the ground and it goes into eight of those, if you can see those green little connectors going in for the 8 apartments on that floor. So we're able to passively split it without needing any electricity in the trash room at all. Super nice. If you can see on the right, that's Rob Johnson, who's another mesh volunteer. I took a picture of, we were splicing the fibers on the roof to connect it to our antennas because we don't, we're selfish, we've got to take advantage and plug in our fiber to the roof as well, so then the whole rest of the wireless network can benefit as well. So that's what we're doing on the roof there. And in the top, we are training basically the youths, both residents and of Grand Street and of the neighborhood, start to learn some really marketable skills on how to splice fiber, how to work with fiber. So those two are some of the youths we were working with to basically learn basic fiber splicing and construction to do the installations into people's homes. So that's a good speed test. And that's coming from our interconnection at 111 8th Avenue at that supernode. So I think when I took that speed test, he had like a gaming computer plugged into our router and we were able to do a speed test. Whoa, that's super fast, yay. But, that's always awesome. The people here have been super ecstatic because, the comparable price, if you get it from Verizon Files or something like that, is very expensive and is often very hard to achieve for a lot of the residents who happen to be on a fixed income. But they still need to be able to get into telehealth. They still need education. They still need entertainment. All of those services, they need it just as much as anyone else. They just, but to be able to support a nonprofit like this and not have to deal with spending on the overhead of all these other, benefit profit-making centers like the other ISPs think about, we're really just focused on making sure that the organization is fiscally covered despite our investments and to expand further. So, it's a great speed. That's, I think, is like 1 millisecond ping down to the interconnect, which is really nice. And it's probably, I've seen 0 sometimes. The only reason why it would fluctuate right now is because the way that we're using, not to get too technical, we are actually not even taking advantage of the entire 40 gigs down to the supernode yet. We're running at like 2 to 3 gigabits capacity just because we still need to fine tune the configurations. Zach is taking care of that and doing an amazing job because he knows all the terms that just go right over my head. But it is really cool to see this sort of evolve, and hopefully more of the mesh volunteers will start to learn some of the jargon as well. So how does the rest of the network benefit? You know, all the residents here, you have to get an apartment in Grand Street Guild to benefit from this, right? Well, actually, so in the wireless side, as you saw Rob splicing the fiber up to the roof, we are now injecting the super fast speed from the data center onto the roof as well. What this means is now, this is actually not here, this is at Vernon, this is in Bed-Stuy, about 4.92 kilometers away, and using an antenna, that's a 10 gigabit antenna that's supposed to come in the mail by the end of June, but is still not in the mail yet, we're able to take a big chunk, like a quarter of that bandwidth, and beam it right into the heart of Brooklyn. That's going to be huge for the network, because that means, you know, even though Grand Street is in Manhattan, Vernon is a really tall building in Brooklyn, and now we can either through fiber, more likely wirelessly, beam that up to more parts of Queens, further up north in Long Island City, and etc. So that's the goal. We are now able to, so Vernon is already able to take advantage of about 1 gigabit, 1.4 gigabits from Grand Street, but once we get the new antennas, we're going to be able to send 10 gigabits over there. So I'm personally really excited for that project because it's going to be, it means that we're able to expand out further east. You can see on the top right, the projector isn't really doing great for my graph, but you can see actually during a really heavy torrential rain, our Vernon to Supernode 3 link went out because if it's a high bandwidth 60 gigahertz, it doesn't do very well in rain. You could see it actually switched over to the Grand Street link as soon as the rain started to hit. And that meant that everyone could seamlessly, no one even noticed the switch, because as soon as basically we've configured those antennas to say, hey, the link speed is dropping below a certain amount, let's just switch over right away. Boom, now it's coming through Grand Street. I think my overall goal is to have it go through Grand Street all the time, because with the additional capacity that Grand Street has, it doesn't, we could set it up. It's very flexible how we set up either what can be the backup, what can be the primary link. It pretty much doesn't matter at that point. We can play with it as much as to our heart's content. So that's the benefit to the wireless side. So the rest of the mesh is not feeling left out. But again, it really goes to show the importance of how important it is to partner with buildings like this, because they're the ones who say, hey, you are able to provide a great service to our residents at an extremely low cost. Come right in. And this is sort of the value, not just the value out of mesh, but just how important these collaborations are in the future. And I know Brian, who's going to present after me, is going to discuss his plans to make those collaborations happen in the future. And that's it for me. Any questions? Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Yeah, I was wondering, for splitting the fiber up within this building, are you guys using GPON to splice it?
Okay, yes. Yes, it is GPON. I'll just go right back over to there we go. Yeah, so yes, we are using GPON. Ubiquity conveniently timely released their GPON solution right when we were starting this project, which was pretty cool. And so yes, it's GPON, pretty much the architecture. I won't get into all the nitty gritty, but yes, we're using splitters, and we're putting their ONTs, optical network terminals, in those apartments, so then people can take advantage of that fiber capacity in their apartment. Yes, yeah. So this pretty much means that people can take advantage of full gigabit back to the switch. Technically, there is a limit on, like, if everyone was hitting it at one port at the same time, there would be some bottleneck within the GPON protocol. But it's very, unless if you're doing something ridiculous, you should not be consuming gigabit like all the time. And even then, the whole idea with GPON is that if someone wanted to, like, for whatever reason, wanted to get a 10 gig link back to our thing, it is possible to shine a different frequency down that light. And then they would have their own dedicated connection without having to run new fiber. That equipment is pretty expensive. I think it's like DWDM, something like that. It is very expensive to have some of those different frequencies, but it's possible. And that just shows how extensible fiber really is and when it comes to going crazy.
Gotcha. Thanks. I had one follow-up question to that. So I was wondering is the connection of the roof also on that GPON so that the downside nodes are sharing with the building?
That is a great question, and the answer is no. There is point-to-point fiber. So terrible, unfortunately, the pixelatedness. I wish I could zoom in. I don't know if that's even, no, I can't. Oh, yes, woo. Okay, that was good. So, so there's a bunch of yellows. You could see them. These yellows over here, that's the GPON. In the back, those yellows are actually going straight to the roof.
Okay.
The blue fibers are the multi-modes that are just plugging into the GPON units, but in the back is actually a really expensive router that is able to handle all of the ports are 10 gigs. They're literally, you have to configure the router not to go 10 gig. It's so powerful. It's ridiculous. But yeah, those fibers in the back over here, those are actually going to the roof. And the way we have it configured now is 20 gigs to the roof with our switch. Again, really hard to take advantage of that. And I think what we might do is when we get that 10 gig link to Vernon, the wireless one, we saved a 2-strand pair, so then that could go straight to this router. It doesn't have to go through anything. It could be 10 gigs straight to here from Bed-Stuy, so it doesn't go through any switching, any bandwidth limitations.
Nice. Thank you.
No problem.
One question: when are you getting your cast off?
Hopefully 2 to 3 weeks.
So 2 questions. The first is just how does the actual cost of doing this compare to what ISPs are actually charging? And then secondly, what's the status of the project? Do you guys still need help building this out, or is it kind of finished at this point?
Great. Yeah, great question. And the costing, I will probably not, I don't know all the specifics on the costs, but there is a lot of overhead that ISPs will say they have that we've, in doing the work, there is a lot of labor, and there's a lot of cost in the labor as well, but there is, a lot of, once you've got the equipment going, the main recurring cost is the fiber lease. And once that's covered, and as you know, as Zach mentioned, it's very much being generously covered by the Grand Street Guild probably because they're pretty much, they are getting the max benefit out of it. Once that cost is complete, there's no other overhead. We're not really paying anyone to maintain the fiber here. If there's an occasional issue with a fiber that needs to be respliced, it can be done by a volunteer. In terms of overhead and maintenance, it's very low. The upfront costs are pretty high, higher than what we usually do. I don't know what the cost model for other ISPs are, but you can go on the Ubiquity website. You can go to B&H and pick up a couple of those for a few grand each, if that's what you want. If you want to start your own GPON network. But, the idea is that once that infrastructure is in place, it's not something that needs to be changed out. And again, if you want to take advantage of higher speeds, you just put different optics on each side, and then you've got better speeds. And the status of the project. Oh, and status of the project. Yeah, so in terms of getting the initial infrastructure in, it's up. And, the network is running. There's currently about 95 there's about 90 apartments connected right now, which is nearly 6 of the property. There is going to be more already in the pipeline. Something that is a little bit of a lesson learned for here and is going to be a lesson going forward when we want to deploy in NYCHA buildings, et cetera, is outreach. If you look around at the demographic of this room, everyone probably has an email address, everyone probably has a bank account, and everyone probably reads the news. The people in these buildings tend to be either on the older side or the more disconnected side, and reaching them has been a little bit more challenging, honestly, just because it's not our usual demographic, and we haven't really mastered that. At this point, we have not mastered that at all. That's why it's been really great to start here in Grand Street Guild as opposed to, say, a night shift development, as the team and the social services here have been super helpful in sort of helping us get flyers out, promotional materials, organizing tenant meetings, et cetera, so then we could spread the word and just piggyback off of their connections instead of having to like, all right, let's collect a bunch of addresses and put them under people's doors. So that's been really great for us in terms of starting here. In terms of the physical build out, we definitely still need help in terms of running fiber to all the floors. You know, so if you want to stick around and say, hey, I'm available some days to help do some fiber running, definitely let us know. There's still a lot more work to do on that front. I know you've done some, John, and you could see how important it is. And, you know, it's kind of, it gets tedious at times only because it's, you know, there's so many floors to do. But, you know, the return on, like, once we do a floor, that's 8 families that can now get on the mesh. And that is such a huge thing to get people connected in that front. So yeah, I believe there's about 27 more floors we have to do, and each of them take about a couple hours. It's not a big job.
A bit of a follow-up to some of the cost questions. In terms of the cost to the residents in this building, is it the same donation, pay what you want model as the rest of the mesh, or is there a different cost model here for the residents?
Yeah, so we treat it as, fiscally, we still treat it as a donation, but it's a much more strongly encouraged to at least do a baseline $10 a month, mainly because there's a fixed cost here, as opposed to in other places where, okay, the equipment's up, now we don't owe anybody anything. You know, that's very different, whereas here, we have a lease to pay, we need to cover it, and we're trying to preserve the fiscal health of the mesh as we're going at it. So most of the residents have no issue paying $10 a month when the other providers, the minimum cost for internet is like $80 on a good day.
For gigabit, it's probably north of 100. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's just for the lowest spectrum plan, 80 here. So, you know, it's a huge boon. And, you know, we've had no issues navigating that cost question here for the residents.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if that's it, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to talk about sort of how to replicate this model across the city.
Brian, where that map, you want to hold
Hi, I'm Brian. I've been with the Mesh for 8 years now, back when it had 0 installs. So I'm going to do a little status update. I used to do these at our meetups back a while ago. But I think it's 2.5 years since I've done a status update, so things have changed a bit. We're over twice the size we were 2 years ago. So, yeah, the number of installs now is 1,186. Yeah, we're growing about 50% a year, which is pretty strong growth still. And the big things that have happened recently, obviously the supernode here, and I call it a pop at 111/8. Also we're finally getting into Harlem. It's taken us a long time, and that photo there is Rob J with some volunteers up in Harlem. So we've got a bunch of installs up in Harlem, and we're trying to get a supernode there as well. What keeps us going is your $20 a month donations. Occasionally we get some people saying, can I donate more? Someone's donating $80 a month, which is nice for their home connection. Yeah, so it's 13 $1,830 a month. So it's a considerable amount of money now, and it's more than paying our bills. And that's our bank account balance today. It's quite healthy at the moment, $306,800. So yeah, we've got to come up with plans on how to spend this money. And first I'll talk about the other thing that's happened here, that we're actually paying people now. It's a big change. It's a bit of a cultural challenge to mix volunteering with paying people. Jason was our bookkeeper here, was one of the first people we paid. We're paying him as a contractor per hour, and also at Grand Street, because it's such a huge project, you couldn't expect volunteers to install hundreds of apartments. So Daniel, Fonda, Merck, Armani, Christian, and others have been working as contractors per hour, and we also got in outside contractors, 700 Nano, to do the riser cables, which involved core drilling. So they had to drill through the concrete in each floor, and yeah. So this has been a big cultural shift. We're still working out how to do this. So there's a big a lot of tension the other day. Like how do you supervise people when we don't really have a hierarchy, and we're all decentralized, but as soon as you have someone supervising someone else, you introduce hierarchy, and so yeah, we've got to figure out how to do that. We're still talking about that. So yeah, what to do with our $300,000 we've got? Full building installs. Yeah, we started out, nearly all of our early installs are one apartment in a building, and someone would ask us to install, and that's all we would do. So we've got this. There's maybe 400 buildings where we've only got one apartment, which is it's so difficult to do one apartment, and it's just a waste, really. And we've never done the outreach to get the full building. So this is. It has been changing recently. I've seen a lot more, at least partial building installs, where we do 5 or 10 apartments in a building. So it has been changing, which is great. I guess as we're getting more established, people have heard of us, so it's easier to get people convinced to install. So yeah, full buildings is the fastest way to help the most people. So it's what the direction I think we should really be going. And there's a way to target buildings. Leaflets work really well, just putting them up. We've done that once and it worked really, really well. And you can do postcard mailouts. There's the post office does it for you. It's just a 2-block radius. It's I think it's the last 4 digits of your postcode. And so you can focus on just like 2 blocks anywhere in the city. So we can do postcard mailouts like that, pretty easy. And yeah, we need to target the buildings we're already in. There's this crazy waste of resources. We stick an antenna on an amazing building, and we do the multi-points to buildings all around it, but then we don't do the apartments inside the building. So we've got great connections at Vernon, but we're not connecting the apartments there. And it just so happened that Rob J and Daniel and I were all at Vernon the other day, and we just noticed how easy it would be to connect the apartments there. We don't have to drill or anything. The raceways are already there. So we're going to do it. We're just going to go ahead and do the apartments at Vernon. But we've got a whole series of these buildings. Saratoga, 7th Street Hub, it's in Alphabet City. It's already pre-wired with Ethernet. All we got to do is put in a few switches. It's a couple of days' work to do 200 apartments there. So yeah, we should do that. Henry Street's one of our oldest hubs, and we connected 1 apartment there. Avenue A, 100 Avenue A, and 0 apartments. So there's some big list of buildings we can do. Yeah, this is Vernon there. It's about two years ago. No, more like 3 or 4 years ago. I was just looking at a map of Brooklyn, and I figured out that this was the best rooftop in Brooklyn for us to get, and we ended up getting it, which it's an amazing rooftop. And yeah, now we should work on connecting all the apartments in. It's in Sumner Houses, which is a fairly notorious NYCHA group of buildings. It's a lot of shootings and things. Yeah, but it's 2,000 apartments in Sumner Houses. So once we start doing the apartments there, we can beam to all the other buildings, and it's 2,000 apartments. So let's do it. The theme of these presentation is I want people to say what the mesh means to each person as they do the presentation, because everyone has a different idea of what the mesh means. And I made this list way back at the beginning because everyone would ask us, why are you doing this? And this was basically every reason I could come up with for doing it. So the 12 reasons. Well, I won't read that out, but it's on the website if you want to search for it. But over the years, what has really occurred to me is that what we're doing. We're doing this decentralized way of organizing things, which I think is really important. And I don't think this project would have worked in a hierarchical way. It just wouldn't have worked at all. And I think the mesh proves that decentralized organizing works. And you can do huge projects this way as long as the goal is very focused. We're just making a community network. That's our goal. So, and I've always hoped that decentralized organizing, could be used for other things. When I got involved with the mesh, I was thinking, will I do this or will I do healthcare? I was going to do decentralized healthcare. So, but I think that things like that are possible. You can do amazing things by decentralized organizing. And what direction would I like the mesh to take? It has completely changed us being here, because this project is maybe 20 times bigger than anything we've done before. It's a completely different scale, and we can do it now. We know how to do huge projects. So yeah, now we know how to do it. We can go to Vernon and do it, and yeah, there's 3.5 million apartments in New York City, so we've got a lot of work to do. And yeah, well, what we're building is a internet infrastructure as a community commons, which is an old idea. You still have you have that a little bit in Manhattan with the community gardens. The people share this common area. But originally, commons were for grazing your sheep or something. It would be in the center of the town. You could take your sheep there to graze. But yeah, and we're bringing back this old-fashioned idea of creating a commons and doing it with the internet. So thank you. Any questions? Yep. Oh.
Could we move to the left so that you're not on the way back down?
So do we see, in terms of Vernon, I know we saw it was easy.
You have to switch it on.
Oh no. When it comes to the larger buildings, what would you say is the most important thing in terms of and how do how have you done, and what is the most important part of like doing relationship building with Grand Street and 100 Avenue A and Henry Stallings, and how does those things originate? How do you reach out to make those things happen?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult at some houses because they don't have a tenant association. And I've done presentation. I did one presentation out there that went really badly, and it's going to be a lot of work to do outreach there. Yes. So.
But like, what is the outreach required to get into the buildings in the first place? Like Grand Street and the Henry Stallings buildings and 100 Avenue A. Like, how do we expand that in that direction to get more of those buildings?
We get a lot of building management companies emailing us, and that's how I got Grand Street initially, and the Stallings buildings. Dan turned up at a meetup and just started chatting with us. So yeah, it's all been word of mouth. But yeah, we could improve on that.
So as the organization does start to scale, are there historical examples of some sort of collection of people that you look to as examples of how you might want to structure this? For instance, there's a long history of co-ops in America.
Yeah.
In other places, do you kind of look to those as examples, or are there other kinds of organizations?
The only one that inspired me was Guifi in Spain, and Catalonia. It's in Catalonia, and they have a very long history of organizing, and they're very good at it, and that is why that we're able to do something like that. Like it's really hard to get this going. Like the first 2 years, we stopped and started, and we gave up a few times and then restarted. So I use the the Park Slope food co-op. I use that as an anti-model. I wanted to do, whatever they did, I wanted to do the opposite. But
Fair enough. And then I guess the other follow-on is you referred to this kind of as a common. Obviously, there's the tragedy of the commons, and I noticed that you were talking about how half of the nodes you've added have been in the past year, but only about 25% of your MRR has been in the last year. Is that something you feel that you'll need to address kind of looking forward, is the propensity of additional people not to contribute as much to the system?
Yeah, it's in some of my blog posts, but Eleanor Ostrom wrote about the tragedy of the commons, and it's a myth. Like there's community organizations that are like thousands of years old, and you can sustain a commons for a very long time. And there was a couple of parts to your question, wasn't there? Some other part.
I think that was the majority of it.
I'm curious how you think we're doing on the 12 reasons.
Should I go back to that?
I think we hit most of them, right?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's a very big issue. Like when we first started, it was about a year and a half after Sandy, and so everyone was really concerned because the blackouts and Red Hook Wi-Fi managed to keep going in Hurricane Sandy. Like I was in complete blackout in the East Village. But yeah, that was a really huge worry, and obviously, things are getting even worse now. So we should prepare for hurricanes and floods. How do you think we're going, Zach?
I think most of them we've done a fair job on. Some of them, like Emergency Community Network, we could do better on, but I think a lot of places we're starting to get better. I think some of the core tenets of neutrality and no collection and decentralization and so forth. I think we're, and self-configuring and so forth, I think we're doing really well in those areas. So I think overall, pretty good, yeah. But it's just interesting to look back maybe 7 years later and see if we are going in the right direction, or are there things that we're not doing a good job of? Yeah, sure, Daniel.
In terms of, I see one that stands out to me, which is the like creating an infrastructure commons. Well, that more which was the one? Community building with highly localized websites. Like, to create our own internet is what I think that, to me, that's analogous to. And I think that if we should probably do a better job at having our members actually know what is possible with what's on the roof. It's like, no, what's on your roof is not just similar to like a modem that you would get from Time Warner. It's like, it's actually a commercial grade router that you can plug in your system to get your Raspberry Pi, you know, use the mesh to tinker. And I bet a lot more people would be, well, probably people who are already on the mesh would probably say, hey, wow, that's awesome. I can do that with what I have. And getting some of more of that knowledge out there, that you can tinker with your internet, and will help you if it goes down. Yeah.
You had mentioned like the financial resources that the mesh has and how that's growing, and I was wondering about like the volunteer resources.
But could you say that again? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned like financial resources and how the mesh is doing really well in terms of financial resources. In terms of volunteering, is that kind of tracking on the same trajectory, or do we need to have more or less of that? Or
yeah, with the pandemic, it's got worse. You know, we're not getting as many new people in, and yeah, we had a weird thing where Hack Manhattan closed for a while, so we got a lot of those people in, but they all went away again. I don't know. Is there anyone left from Hack Manhattan? I don't know. Yeah, so yeah, I think I wanted to do these meetups every second week, and I think we'll get momentum going again.
Cool. I like the meetups.
Yeah. I'd like to add to that, just because I really strongly agree. As Brian mentioned earlier, one of the ways we got a lot of buildings is word of mouth. People show up at a meetup and they say, hey, I'm on the board of this co-op, would you like to come here? Or I happen to own 25 buildings, or something like that. Some really interesting people have shown up. And most of the volunteers are people who showed up at meetings, myself included, and a lot of other people. And so I think having these meetups, or having a place where people show up and argue and ask questions, is really important. This is a physical network we're building, and people physically have to actually do it. So that's really important, and we've definitely been hurt by COVID because of that, because we haven't had meetups. And yet we've also got some of our most awesome volunteers at the same time during COVID because they didn't have other things to do. So I think there's a positive and a negative, but we really need to increase in the volunteering for sure. Yes. Yeah. Jason, please.
So looking at two of those reasons, a thought that I just had, and I'm not sure what the plans are for it. How are you protecting against abuse on the network? So I'm thinking of two reasons: one, freedom from neutral networks that does not block or discriminate content, and highly localized websites. What's to prevent MeshNet members from using it for illicit content or abusing the network, saturating it, so on and so forth?
It's an internet connection, so people are going to do what they want. We strongly discourage bad activities, but that's about all we can do. And there is one advantage of using wireless as the last mile is that people can only saturate their own connection, and so it kind of distributes it that way. We occasionally have problems where there's a few apartments on an Omni and someone's doing torrenting, and it's really badly affects the other people, but only that one building.
Thank you. speaking on the no personal data collection, it'd be really interesting if we could add encryption on layer 2 somehow, some way. If we have a little more organizational capacity, is that something that NYC Mesh is looking at revisiting? Like, I know in the past CJDNS was used, maybe something else in the future?
That's a Zach question.
Yeah, so encryption on layer 2 and things like CJDNS. So one part about the mesh is that because it is going to be, because the routers are on people's rooftops and the routers are doing routing, at some point you would have to decapsulate, route, and re-encapsulate, right? So almost all star, right? All of the connections star are encrypted on the wireless part of the network. So we're not super concerned about sniffing in the air, but could a bad actor in the middle of a network read your traffic apart from SSL and so on? Perhaps, right? Now, things like CJDNS or Tor or other BMX6 and 7, they do fancy things to try and get your traffic routed around. However, you still depend on the endpoint, which is also operated by the community to open your traffic and send it to the internet. So I don't think, I think we've argued about it and we've talked about it, we've talked with other meshes, and I don't think that we strongly are interested in doing layer 2 encryption, mainly because this is a community network. It's not a secret Tor anonymous network, right? Now, that does mean you have to trust your neighbor, but yet also it's a community network, right? So we believe generally that having SSL and TLS on the internet is good enough, and that we're kind of akin to a coffee shop Wi-Fi, more or less. Now, that may not be the most settling for most people, but you know, again, it's a commons, it's kind of a, it's the best available option. It meets 99% of the needs for 98%. Let's be a little under, right, of people's needs. And so there is a possibility of something bad happening, but not so much. The main issue with CJDNS, one of the big reasons, actually, this was about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, a little bit after I started, and we ran a year on BMX6 and stuff like that after. And a huge challenge with these custom routing protocols is that they really don't work very well, and they don't scale, and they usually need very custom versions of specific open routing platforms like OpenWRT, which is a good project, right? But it's challenging to find hardware that works with those. It's challenging to find hardware that's affordable and fast enough. And even if you do, these protocols really don't function very well. And it's hard to say, it's hard to argue that unless you have a large number of nodes. And so by using very standard protocols, we're using OSPF for our routing, it really opens up that we can have any brand of router, we can have any model, we can have any type of connection, and you know, it really future-proofs us and makes it a very inclusive network versus something that's super exclusive and only works on one model, on one firmware. And so that's why we've gone that way. So all of that to say, I think that over time we've kind of developed more towards it's better to use something that works and is really boring and is very open rather than doing something that which is good for 98% of the 97, let's decrease a little bit more, 97% of the people, rather than, you know, going for something that is overly secure and satisfying a very edge niche that not as many people have. If you do feel like you want edge security, we have VPN tunnels to the supernodes. You can have a WireGuard tunnel. You can use a WireGuard tunnel on the network if you want, and it will transport you across the network and drop you on a supernode. So if you don't trust the middle and you really want that, you can have it. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll give it back to you in case you have.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's very cool, by the way. And yeah, thanks for answering the question. I think what I meant to imply was maybe we could have some sort of layer network, GNU-Net, if it's ever finished. I did some work with them. We'll see. But it might be a fun project for some volunteers to maybe do, like, I know you got all that juicy rack space at the new installation. So, you know, if there were to be a node for, say, GNU-Net or some other fun project, whatever you guys are into.
we can definitely have overlay networks on top of the network. I encourage you guys to get together and build that stuff. You can definitely put routers in different areas for fun, especially if it's something that's really good for the community. We also have a community colo in Supernode 3, which means that you as mesh members can put a server in the data center in Supernode 3. You put your own server there, and you have whatever size connection you want, and you do whatever you want with it, right? It's for your own personal development, not for commercial. And so if you want to host your own website, you want to host an experimental box, you want to do something, you can definitely do that in Brooklyn. And yeah, if people want to make CJDNS overlays between each other on the mesh, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So yes, all of those things, yes to everything, except for running these odd routing protocols on top of the routers around the mesh, because it's just really such a pain and such a challenge to do it, and it's not a great idea. Yeah. So.
I wanted to say one other thing about the mesh expansion in general. I remember back, was it 2019, we had a pretty popular New York Times article, and following the article we had, I don't know, I think within a few months we had 200 new install, some huge number of install requests very quickly. And so we've experienced different kinds of expansion. I've been involved since 2017. And publicity brings one type of interest, whereas expanding to buildings brings a different type of expansion, where we don't have the same community interest. The individuals aren't as invested in the growth as compared to when it is presented in a way that it piques people's interest. So there's different ways of expanding that we've experienced.
Yeah, publicity's been a big driver.
Yeah, I was wondering, are there examples currently of like intranet services on the mesh where you have like websites?
Yeah, we've tried many times over the years, and I'm not sure what's running at the moment. There's a channel for that on Slack, mesh services.
Okay. I was actually curious, are people being assigned public IP addresses, or is everyone being assigned private IP addresses and natted out to the internet?
Yeah, we occasionally hand out IPv4 addresses. Sometimes a building needs it for their camera or something.
Gotcha. All right, thanks.
I'll give it to Jolly, but to add to the question, we do have an internal DNS server, so we have a DNS authoritative server, so you can say yourname.mesh or whatever you want. And as Brian said, we have had DNS, we have had services in the past, and they've kind of fallen away because they are run by mesh members. So if somebody doesn't run it, then it's a problem. But it's definitely a thing we need. We had a search engine that I made and it fell down. We had a home page and we had a Git server and we had some chat systems and stuff like that. So if you want to do it, I encourage you to do it, and you can have anything you want to do it. So yeah, Jolly.
This is a question from online, and it's kind of redundant after the last few, but it's Dan Miller asks, what internal services or capabilities are planned or desired beyond internet peering? For example, we use Slack for communication. Could a locally hosted communication application hosted have value?
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, we don't have much running right now, but I wish we did, and I think we all wish we did. It's an area that we have not done very well in, mainly because it requires people to develop things. However, there are a lot of developers who are members, and so I think that's a great thing. Maybe we can have a meetup just concentrating on that. And we had a hackathon some years ago. Maybe we should do that again. But I do think it's something that is really missing from our goals list. So I would like to see us get better in that area. What was the other half of the question, Jolly? Oh, about Slack, right? Yeah, we've had some internal chat things. One challenge is we need people to be in the chat who are not on the mesh yet, because that's how they get on the mesh, and that's how they coordinate. So if it's only in the mesh, it's a bit of a challenge. And trying to make the balance between going fully open source and fully, do it ourselves versus something that really works. Going of Slack, most people can get on Slack, and it works really well most of the time. So versus if we're running something ourselves, we're not putting our best effort into building the network. We're now trying to build a service that can handle 6,000 members and trying to do that sort of thing, which is a little bit different than building the network. So we've gone with Slack for that reason, not because it's the most equitable or the most secure, but just because it chats with everybody in the whole world, right? Everybody can do it. So. Any other questions who I can get the microphone to? Okay. Or we'll turn it back to you, Brian. Oh, someone, yes.
I'm sure myself or maybe some other people would be happy to host a Matrix home server and bridge to the Slack if that'd be allowed. Why not? I'm sure somebody is.
Yeah, just to add my own 2 cents about it, I've been able to get my past job, my nonprofit actually relies on the mesh for part of their backup servers and stuff like that. So, it's definitely possible. And I think something that also hasn't been mentioned yet is about setting expectations for what the mesh can do. The supernodes have an insanely good uptime in terms of reliability. I've never had an issue no matter how much times I DM Zach saying, hey, my server stopped working, it's always my fault. And it's never been something like the mesh router crashed at the supernode. No, that just doesn't happen. But it's all about setting expectations. And when it comes to running services, again, as sort of adding on what he said, it really matters on how do you pitch a service that really is best effort, despite what the track record is, especially at the supernode. It's still volunteer run, and making sure that our efforts are focused in what matters. And what matters may be different to every different person, but that's why we can have different Slack channels to talk about it. Something that I'm going to pick Zach's brain about later is say, right now the main colo space for putting your own servers in a rack is in Sunset Park, which is a little far from me. I live in Ridgewood, Queens. But, now that we have fiber landing in this building, what if, let's say that closet where actually a lot of the internet for the access poles could be a colo space? Just, this is the whole idea of putting open access. So maybe we can have colo space in Greenpoint. Maybe we can have colo space here. Maybe we can have colo space in Queens. And that's part of again, with varying levels of reliability, but all of that is possible if we just put our heads together. Are you all right? Cool. Well, I think, you have one thing.
I actually have one question that I'm curious about. With the other buildings that you're talking about, the large buildings, is there a set expectation that we would get space in those buildings like we do in Grand for having kind of like a base of operations, or is that not expected in some of those buildings? And how would you plan to handle that if we don't have an office in the place?
That is a fantastic question. All of that is up, all of that is on a building by building basis. I know when we first started the Vernon project, NYCHA was very generous enough to actually clear out a space in their basement. Maybe not clear out, but they had a space in their basement that they dedicated to us, hey, you can put your padlock here, you can do it. The only reason why we didn't end up using it is because over the weekend, not even over the weekend, I was coming back from school and I just wanted to stop by to check it out, maybe do some measurements, and I saw 2 inches of water on the floor. So we didn't use the space. But, we still have some space on the roof where our servers are, and, that could still be useful. And I bet, with a little bit of brainstorming, we could put pallets. We can definitely use that space. And so at least at Vernon, if we end up doing a fiber deployment, we can totally store stuff down there. And, NYCHA has been generous enough to provide that space. Grand Street's generous enough to provide this space. So it's definitely not out of the question. Is it a deal breaker if we don't have the space? No, but it all comes down to how much overhead can we rely on volunteers to be transporting stuff back and forth. It's obviously been a challenge. I'm very lucky to have a car to drive around in the city, at least when it's not too hot because my car doesn't have AC. So, so definitely apart from that, I've often been a person schlepping like 10-foot poles out of my car window to get it to a site. But, it definitely depends on who's available. And hopefully the model, if we can have space, is a good point. We should definitely try to have like at least a little closet for stuff.
The irony in all of it is that the bottleneck for our organization, I think, has always been people, installers, right? So we always hit the bottleneck there. There's unlimited resources in this city for us to expand. And as people, everyone is generally speaking, everyone's enthusiastic about inexpensive, fast internet. The question is who can we get to do the work? That's always the challenge.
Some of the other volunteer things I've been involved in, would be asked, can I give you like clothing or shoes? And I'm always like, we need humans. Give me some humans. Is what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Actually, that's cool. When you're talking about expectations, I got me thinking, when you're adding like whole buildings like this or Vernon, I would imagine that potentially changes the expectations where like as you were saying, the residents maybe didn't really make this choice themselves, and it's their only option after it's all set up, potentially. Does that add a concern of like if the internet goes down, say at Vernon, and the link to there, like that whole building goes down, and that's probably maybe a lot of people that didn't particularly necessarily care about the mesh themselves versus the people who have the single installs where they like asked for it.
Great question. And this is a very real one. There are issues all the time. When it comes to, usually it's stable once things have been up. Once we invested heavily, Vernon was a big test ground for like, hey, we're going to put a battery backup system because every time 2 elevators move at the same time, everything shuts off for a second. And it's like, okay, we spend a few $100 to go to B&H, get an UPS, and it solves a lot of problems. Then when we do the same thing at Grand Street, we just know, okay, we're going to put a UPS. Any building that has a lot of installs, we're going to put a UPS now. So it is sort of, we've learned how to manage those bigger building expectations. And in terms of managing, I think, the expectations of like end users, Jason made a good point about, how when it comes to outreach and when it comes to expansion, the people who get on the mesh because they read a New York Times article are probably going to have a different set of expectations than if someone who met it through their hacker space or knew it from a friend. It's like, ooh, we want to tinker. So that's a great point. And, we have to be careful about over saying like, hey, we have gigabit, and, there's obviously no guarantee, right? Because again, it is volunteer run and it's really dependent on who can be there to help the problems. It is really awesome that, me alongside with other key volunteers like Marg and whoever's on the Slack, and Olivier, who does a lot of support functions from Europe at this point, stick around because they handle a lot of support functions. Brian does so much back end that a lot of people don't appreciate. And having that in mind, we are lucky sort of that's been the case. But something, a personal goal of mine this summer especially, is to try to get more people engaged in those back-end functions, whether it's inventory, whether it's support, whether it's learning how to monitor the network, how do we build tools to more easily monitor the network. So those things will help with the expectations actually reach higher than that, higher reliability in many cases. So, great question. Okay, well, we have had a very long meeting, and I know it's late. We are just going to, I believe the idea is to break out into sections, or what people feeling. He has a Yeah, so I think the formal session of the meeting is over. I'm going to stick around. I believe Zach and Brian are going to stick around for any more questions, specific things, and to talk about mesh-related stuff. So. Yeah, maybe during the daytime, you know. Awesome. What's that? Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much, everyone watching online, and thank you to everyone here for being part of it, and see you at the next org meeting. Thanks.